White people have always been heavily addicted to drugs, and they have always blamed everyone else for it. For centuries, white societies have been drowning in drugs. From opium dens in Victorian England to the cocaine-fueled Wall Street 1980s to the opioid crisis today. They mass produce and export drugs and then act shocked when addiction spreads. They flood their own communities with narcotics and then blame immigrants and minorities for it. They profit off of the drug trade and then punish black and brown people for participating in the market that they created. White people don't just use drugs. They don't just sell drugs. They invented modern drug capitalism and then pretended to be the victims. Long before street dealers and cartels, the largest drug pushers in history were white colonial empires. The British Empire made its fortune selling opium to China. The Dutch and Portuguese trafficked tobacco and cocoa from the Americas. The U.S. economy was built in part on alcohol sales to Native Americans, fueling addiction while justifying land seizures. The Opium Wars were the original white drug cartel. Britain spent decades smuggling opium into China, getting millions of Chinese people hooked on narcotics. When China tried to ban opium, Britain started 2 wars to force it back onto the market. The result? A massive addiction crisis which weakened China's entire society while white empires raked in drug profits. This was not a black market operation. This was government-backed narco-capitalism. And yet, white history books barely mention it. White people love their narcotics, but every time addiction spirals out of control, they find a way to blame immigrants and black people. In the 1800s, white Americans got hooked on opium, so they blamed Chinese immigrants for running opium dens. In the 1920s, white America was drowning in cocaine, so they claimed that cocaine-crazed black men were attacking white women. In the 1980s, white people partied on cocaine, but when black communities used crack, a cheaper version of the same drug, they got thrown into prison under mandatory sentencing laws. In the 2000s, white people overdosed on heroin and Oxycontin, so suddenly, addiction became a health crisis instead of a crime. Every time white society succumbs to addiction, media shifts the narrative. When white people use drugs, they're victims. When black people and brown people use drugs, they're criminals. White America has never had a war on drugs. It's always been a war on drug users who aren't white. White people love to act like drug trafficking is a problem caused by Mexico or Colombia, but the real drug lords wear suits, not cartel masks. The Sackler family, which owns Purdue Pharma, flooded America with Oxycontin, making billions while fueling the opioid crisis. Big Tobacco knowingly sold addictive cigarettes for decades, killing millions while lobbying against regulations. Pharmaceutical companies create and market amphetamines like Adderall, legally hooking entire generations on legal meth. Yet nobody is kicking their doors down or locking them up in cages. Because when white people run the drug trade, it's called business. White people don't just do drugs, they rebrand them to make them socially acceptable for their own use. Heroin is criminal, unless it's called pain management and prescribed in a suburban doctor's office. Cocaine is a ghetto drug until Wall Street executives and Hollywood celebrities normalize it. Marijuana was demonized as a black and Mexican drug until white entrepreneurs could make a profit off of dispensaries. Psychedelics were criminalized when utilized by indigenous cultures, but became a wellness trend when white influencers discovered them. If it's in a black or brown community, they call it a crack house. If it's in a white community, they call it a wellness retreat. A poor black person doing mushrooms is a junkie, while a rich white tech bro doing mushrooms is biohacking. A homeless person on opioids is an addict, while a white soccer mom on prescription opioids is struggling with a disease. White people don't just steal land, music, and labor. They steal entire drug cultures, clean up the branding, and then sell it back to the world. White capitalists mass produce drugs. White politicians criminalize drug use, unless the users are white. White doctors overprescribe opioids to their own communities. White media blames everyone else when addiction spirals out of control. And now, after centuries of creating the very crisis they claim to fight, white Americans want to be seen as the victims. They ignored the crack epidemic in black neighborhoods. They demonized Mexican and Colombian drug traffickers. They jailed millions of black and brown people for minor drug offenses. But now that white people are overdosing in record numbers, suddenly it's a public health crisis. Suddenly, addiction isn't a crime, it's a disease. Suddenly, they want treatment instead of punishment. White people will never admit that their society has been hooked on drugs for centuries, because that would mean accepting responsibility for the crisis they created. White America has never been against drugs. They were only ever against black and brown people having access to them. Cope.